Tonight, the shrinking economy as strikes and wet weather dampen growth in July. Was it just a rough month, or are we teetering on the brink of recession? The 0.5% contraction was worse than economists had predicted, but it does follow a slight uptick the previous month. So what's really going on with UK PLC? And just what is the plan for growth? We'll speak to Transport Secretary Mark Harper. Also tonight, record numbers of children suspended from school, with girls increasingly likely to be told to stay away. We'll hear from teenager Lacey and ask how we should handle bad behaviour in the classroom. And it costs billions of pounds a year, but the government doesn't dare ditch the pensions triple lock. Are they right to fear the anger of older voters? New polling shows that pensioners might care more about younger people than ministers think, even if it does come with a price. All that and more with our panel, Jess, Phillips, the Labour MP and Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence, and Guto Harri, the former Head of Communications of Boris Johnson, who are here to give their take for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Now, the first thing that I want to do tonight is to bring you right up to date with a breaking news story. Because Sara Sharif was a 10-year-old girl and she was found dead at her home in Woking last month. Well, tonight, some of her family members are returning to the UK from Pakistan. Sky's Ivor Bennett joins us now. He's live outside Surrey Police Headquarters with the latest. What can you tell us?
Yeah, good evening, Sophie. Yeah, this is a very significant development in this story after a flurry of developments in it this week. So Sara Sharif's father, stepmother and uncle are all due to arrive back in the UK from Pakistan in around a quarter of an hour or so. They boarded a flight, Sky News understands, in Pakistan early this morning in Sialkot in northeastern Pakistan. They changed in Dubai and they'll be landing at Gatwick's North Terminal in around 15 minutes or so, where they are expected to be met and questioned by police officers from the UK. Now, that's after they've been the focus of an international manhunt for the last few weeks, wanted for questioning not just by Surrey police but also authorities in Pakistan and Interpol too. That's after 10-year-old Sara Sharif was found dead at the family home in Woking just over a month ago. That was on the 10th of August, with police alerted after a call to 999 by a man who identified himself as Sara's father, Irfan, who claimed to be in Pakistan at the time. A post-mortem examination revealed that Sara had suffered multiple and extensive injuries. That then prompted detectives here to launch this murder investigation and for them to seek this trio, these three adults from Sara's family, for questioning. They couldn't locate them. Pakistani police were then involved too, after it transpired that the three of them had left the UK on the 9th of August, the day before Sara's body was found. They had travelled with Sara's 5 siblings, who are aged between 1 and 13. Now, those 5 children, in a separate development in this quite complicated case, earlier this week, they got taken into care by the Pakistani government after they were recovered from the grandfather's house, also in northeastern Pakistan. As for this trio of adults, what prompted them to board this flight that's expected to land in Gatwick imminently, well, that's not entirely clear. But last week, in a video shared with Sky News, Sara Sharif's stepmother, Bainash Batul, referred to Sara's death as an incident, and in it she said the family is willing to cooperate with British authorities and that they'll fight their case in court, and saying that they had been forced into hiding, essentially for fear of their safety. It may well come to them appearing in court, but first and foremost, of course, one imagines there'll be an extensive conversation with police, with them expected to be met by officers when they land at Gatwick Airport in the next 15 minutes.
Ivor, thank you very much indeed. And of course, we will keep you up to date with that story. We will let you know as soon as that plane does land. Now, it was one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges to the British people to get the economy growing. And in July, it shrank by 0.5%, which is worse than analysts had been expecting. Now, we're told that's partly because of bad weather. I'm not sure even Labour would blame the government for a rainy summer. But there was another factor at play too: strikes. Industrial action so widespread so lingering that I'm starting to think that this could be the defining issue that Rishi Sunak's premiership is remembered by. So who better to speak to this evening than Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary? Many strikes, of course, that you've been grappling with your whole time as Transport Secretary. But just before we get to that,
sure.
Can I just get your reaction to a story that's broken this afternoon? Tobias Ellwood resigning as chair of the Defence Select Committee. This is after he released a video effectively praising the Taliban. Was that the right decision by him?
What, releasing the video or the
resigning?
Well, look, it's not for a member of the government to comment on a chairman of a parliamentary select committee. I mean, look, he clearly has concluded that what he said and the video that he released was unwise. But, you know, who the chairman of the select committee is not a matter for the government. It's a matter for the House of Commons. Well, I saw the video and I don't think it reflected what I know about Afghanistan and the way women are treated in that country. So I don't think it was a representation of what's going on, and that's obviously what Tobias has concluded. But it'll be for the House of Commons to make a decision about who the new chairman should be, and that's a matter for members of Parliament.
OK. GDP fell more than expected in July. It's not a great look from a PM who said he'd sort out the economy, is it?
Well, I think you also have to look at the revisions that the ONS made to the statistics recently to show over a 3-month period the economy grew. And also, you know, the narrative we've been having from the Labour Party is that the economy hadn't grown post-pandemic. And we now know that Britain was the fastest growing G7 country other than the United States post-pandemic.
It's an important point.
Which is important because Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor during the pandemic who made some really big calls on the economy, which not everyone agreed with, which we now know meant that we were the fastest growing G7 economy recovering from the pandemic, which is a really big deal.
Accept that. What I have to go on now is the figures we have, right, from the ONS, and they are saying that growth is anaemic and that it fell in July.
Well, I listened to the interview that the independent head of the ONS gave, and he made it clear that, yes, there were 1-month figures, but he also said over a 3-month period, the figures were actually quite positive with growth in a number of sectors of the economy. So, look...
So we should be relaxed. We should be happy then with the growth.
No,
levels.
the government's not relaxed. The government's focused, as we know from the government's top priority, on halving inflation, and also of the other 5 priorities, 3 of them are economic, about growing the economy and about making sure we reduce debt. And the government's focused on those. It's not relaxed at all. That's the top priority for the government. And my department, Transport, is about investing in transport provision to enable the economy to grow. It's an economic driver.
Are you also focused on stopping the strike action that the ONS was pretty clear was a big driver of some of the growth damage we've seen? How damaging has it been to the economy?
Well, look, I am, and you know, when I was interviewed by you before, when I first became Transport Secretary, I met all the union leaders. We changed the tone of the debate and we made some progress. As you remember, we had an offer on the table to all of the RMT members that work for Network Rail. That was put to the members, the union members, overwhelmingly accepted, 90% turnout, 76% in favour. Now, for reasons that I genuinely don't understand, there's a similar offer, similar value, very reasonable offer in line with what people across the economy are being paid, with some reform that the unions have on the table. It's been made to them by the train operating companies, and for reasons best known to themselves, they won't put it to their members till their members decide. That's what should happen next. Let their members decide whether they want to do the deal.
When was the last time you met union leaders?
I haven't met them for some time because...
How long is some time?
Well, I haven't met them...
days, weeks?
No. I haven't met them. I'm not doing the negotiations. The negotiations are between the trade union...
It's a really simple question.
Well...
When did you last meet them?
No, I haven't met them for some time because...
But how long is some time?
Well, no, I met Mick Lynch and Mick Whelan earlier this year. And since I met them, I can't remember the exact date, but I'm not pretending it was recently because the negotiations have been undertaken between the train operating companies, and there's a deal on the table waiting to be put to the members.
Last 6 months?
No, it was the earlier part of the year. We changed the tone of the debate. We resolved the dispute with Network Rail, which is tens of thousands of employees working for the rail network. That deal's done, which means that on strike days, there's less disruption. Freight's not disrupted, for example. And there's an offer on the table. That offer's a good one. It's fair and reasonable. and I don't understand why the unions won't put it to their members and let their members decide.
Do you take some responsibility for this? Because you're effectively blaming the union leaders. You're saying, look, they're not putting it to their members, but you've admitted that you haven't met them since the early part of the year.
But what you're really saying, Sophie, is that in response to...
You said that you're going to reset the relationship. Well, maybe you should get around the table and try and do that.
But what you're really saying is that because they won't put it to their members, I should get more of the taxpayers' money, because that's who's paying for this, by the way. Since the pandemic, the taxpayer subsidises the railway system.
Hang on. I'm not asking why you haven't met with them.
Because what you're really saying is the point of all the people that say I should meet with them, it's because they want me to make a more generous offer.
I haven't said anything about the offer.
With more taxpayers' money.
With respect, I haven't said anything about the offer.
But that would be the only purpose of meeting them, is to make a more generous offer. There's a fair and reasonable offer on the table. The revenues going into the railway companies have fallen by 30% since the pandemic. And anyone listening to this knows if you're running a business, 30% of your revenue disappears, you need to make a reasonable pay offer, not a ridiculously generous, a reasonable one, and there needs to be some reform in how the business is run to make it sustainable. Now, that is on the table. I want to drive up the number of people using the rail system, but just throwing taxpayers' money from hard-working taxpayers...
It's free to meet them, though, isn't it? That doesn't cost anything.
If you're just going to meet them and nothing's going to happen, there is no point in doing that. There's a reasonable offer on the table, and I think they should put it to their members.
Gillian Keegan's managed to sort out the teachers' strikes. There's been some progress on the NHS strikes. You start to look like a bit of an outlier here. No,
as I said, we solved the deal on Network Rail. So all of the Network Rail dispute is now over. The smaller trade unions that work for the train operating companies have accepted the offer that was made to them. So actually quite a lot of progress is made. The outliers are the RMT for the train operating companies, who won't put the deal, and the train drivers union, whose members get paid an average of £60,000 a year for a 4-day week, 35 hours a week. They've got a pay offer on the table that takes that salary to £65,000 a year, and they won't put that to their members either.
Have you met your match with Mick Lynch?
Well, I think you just need to ask who's being reasonable here.
Are they being unreasonable then? Is that what you think?
Well, I think they are being unreasonable. There's a reasonable offer on the table. It's the same value as the one they had on Network Rail. And all I'm saying to them is put it to your members and let your members decide. And that seems to me a very reasonable thing to do.
OK. We talked about growth, and there has been, a bit of a disappointment in growth. Inflation is easing slightly. Do you think that, just from an economic perspective, this might mean that we start to see some of an easing of that pressure when it comes to interest rates, that they might start coming down a bit, helping mortgage owners?
Well, look, I don't want to second-guess what the Bank of England's going to do. It's important they keep the focus on driving down inflation. That's what makes the difference about whether people are better off or not. And we've seen with the latest ONS figures on pay that pay is now rising faster than inflation, so people are getting a real terms pay rise. So we'll have to see how the economic factors... But the Bank of England is having to tread a careful path between putting pressure on reducing inflation, but not so much that it damages the economy. There's a fine path to tread there, and that's a decision for them. The government's trying to support them by making sensible decisions about public spending and pay. And I think we've seen inflation coming down, so we need to see that continue through the year. And then once inflation is under control, then interest rates will be able to fall.
A quick thought on the vote in House of Lords tonight. Now, this is the government wants to sort of scrap some of the laws around water pollution in order to encourage more house building. Are you a bit worried that, you're going to be portrayed as the party of dirty water here? It's something that voters really care about a lot.
Well, it is an important issue, but I'm not interested in what Labour says about it. I'm interested in what we're actually doing, and I've looked at the detail very carefully. There are 100,000 house building opportunities that are going to be unlocked here. We are being very minor changes that we're making, and we're putting mitigations in place to protect the quality of water, because that's very important. Labour say they want to build houses, and then they vote against a measure to do it, as the Prime Minister said today. Keir Starmer goes from being a builder to a blocker. You can't believe a word he says. We want to build houses and protect the environment because we want to enable young people to get on the housing ladder.
But you're prioritising house building?
No, we're prioritising house building and making changes to how we protect the environment, so we continue to protect the environment whilst enabling people to get on the housing ladder, and I think that's a very sensible balance to strike.
Now, I just want to kind of zoom out for a moment, if I may, because Labour still has a pretty hefty lead in the polls, right? Now, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff reportedly told advisers recently that if they don't believe the Conservatives can win the next election, then they should quit. Do you believe the Conservatives are going to win the next election?
I absolutely do.
Really?
Yes, I do. I've watched the Prime Minister up close. It's why I backed him to be leader of the Conservative Party. I said to you just now he made the right big calls when he was Chancellor, which is why our country has rebounded fastest economically post-pandemic.
So why don't the public seem to agree with you then?
Well, look, we had a very difficult year last year, which I think everyone understands. The economy, we were having to focus on reducing inflation, so it's been tough for people. So, you know, I would expect people to be somewhat sceptical, but I think we're making the right long-term calls on some of the big challenges facing the country. And look, when we get to the election, as we get towards it, people have to make a choice. They have to make a choice between the Prime Minister who's making the right calls on the long-term issues facing the country, or a Labour leader who backed Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister and who flip-flops around on all the important issues and people can't believe a word he says. And I think with that choice, I know who people will choose, and I think they will therefore give us another term in office.
Rishi Sunak's ratings are now lower than Boris Johnson's. I mean, Guto Harri is sitting over there. He's a big Boris Johnson fan. Was it a mistake to get rid of him?
No, it wasn't. Look, the Parliamentary Party made a decision about Boris Johnson, and I think they were right to do so. But look, I want to focus on the future. The Prime Minister's laying out, I think, the priorities for the country. As we get towards the election, he will set out the priorities for the future and set out our manifesto. And I think when people face the choice at the next election, they'll back the Prime Minister.
OK.
I certainly will, and that's what I will continue working towards as we run towards the election.
Ever optimistic. Thank you very much for being on the programme tonight. Mark Harper there speaking to us, Transport Secretary. Great to have you on the programme. Now, let's bring in, shall we, our duo for tonight. We've got Jess Phillips, the Labour MP for Birmingham Yardley, and also Guto Harri, who was a senior advisor to Boris Johnson, both as the Mayor of London and the Prime Minister. Good to have you both on the programme tonight. Let's talk a little bit, shall we, about some of the issues we talked about, strike action, for example. How difficult do you think it is as an issue to try and resolve?
I mean, it is a difficult issue. I don't think that there's any reason why, with the greatest respect to the Transport Secretary, if he says he doesn't know why they haven't put it to their members and yet he hasn't asked them in a meeting, I would very much suggest having a meeting with them to ask them exactly why they're not putting it to their members and to maybe try and negotiate on that particular point. Because coming on here and saying, they should put it to their members without going and talking to them, I think is probably not the best. But, we can't undermine that it's a difficult decision.
What would you say to that?
Well, look, there's an offer on the table. I'm not doing the negotiations. The negotiations are between the train operating companies and the trade unions. As I said, there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table. It's pretty much in line with the one that their own members accepted overwhelmingly on Network Rail. And I think they should put it to their members. I think their members deserve a pay rise. They're hard-working and they deserve the chance to vote on the pay rise. And the trade unions should put it to their members.
I know from years at City Hall that Mark is wise to hang back because there's nothing the unions would like to do more than to turn a commercial and industrial negotiation into a political battle. And so when you meet, what they then do is play a sort of left versus right, workers versus a Conservative government kind of narrative, and that doesn't help the negotiation. And I remember for years at City Hall, the managers of Transport for London begged the Mayor not to get involved because it would overcomplicate it and oversimplify it at the same time and turn something that should be between them into another battle with the government. That said, there's a limit to how long you can have strikes across the public sector in the UK without people inevitably thinking the government is not in charge, and that's the danger with this.
OK. Well, it's been really good to have you on the programme. We're going to have a lot more from our panel after this break as well. But up next on the Politics Hub, with our waterways already swollen with sewage, there are now controversial plans. We've been talking about them tonight to scrap water pollution rules to encourage house building. Defeated in the Lords in the last few minutes, we're asking, are dirty rivers a price to pay to help fix the housing crisis?
Maud was our two and a half year old daughter who became ill in the lead up to Christmas of 2011. And she displayed flu-like symptoms and croup, I suppose. A parent might recognise it as croup. But I was worried that it had gone to her chest, and we took her into a local A&E paediatric department in a local hospital, and she was looked at and discharged. And then her condition worsened, and we took her in again. And then this was on New Year's Day in 2010, and she was discharged again. She's there with my wife, Clara, and she was discharged again, and then sadly she passed away in the night, and we found her on New Year's Day. Healthcare professionals, and the ones that I talk to and work with, are as concerned and as desperate to improve care, but they are, underfunded, and frankly, and the NHS has terrible funding problems, and this is the front line, and this is what's happening. It's nasty because a sepsis lurks behind presenting symptoms. So in Maud's case, there was a chest infection, croup, and you think, well, let's treat that. That's what it is. And then you're focusing in on that when actually sepsis works by being masked by those presenting symptoms. It starts to close organs down. The fever gets worse. Things get worse. And you think, why is this happening? That's something we always say that at the UK Sepsis Trust, that we always say to parents: ask anyone along the healthcare pathway that you're, regrettably involved in. Ask anyone at any time, could this be sepsis?
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. We're your source for all of the day's political news and analysis. Now, this show shares a name with our digital Politics Hub, which I'm in front of right now, and you can catch up with anytime on your phone or computer. So we can take a look at some of today's Hub highlights. And let's start with this story, shall we? We did discuss it with Mark Harper, breaking a bit earlier this evening. Tobias Ellwood has resigned as chair of the Defence Select Committee, and it's after 4 committee members tabled a no-confidence motion in him after a video he posted online where the tone was a bit like a travel programme. He was kind of cheerful backing music, and he seemed to be pretty positive about the Taliban's achievements. Anyway, let's show you this. This is the write-up of the afternoon NHS round table, because the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary have been meeting clinical leaders to discuss how to handle winter pressures. And we report that NHS England's Chief Executive, Amanda Pritchard, was there. But frontline staff, including and doctors and nurses, weren't invited, controversially. And let's have a look, shall we, at our third story. Here we go. This is our pledge tracker, and it has been updated with the latest economic data as well, hopefully. But anyway, what you can do is you can have a look at our hub to really take a big check on Sunak's 5 pledges. It's something that we're really trying to focus on. Remember the 5 promises that he made such a big deal of. And on our Politics Hub, you can look at our live tracker to check up our independent process on how he's doing. Let's have a little chat, shall we, with Jess and Guto, shall we? Guto, I had to ask you this. You saw Mark Harper there saying it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake to get rid of Boris Johnson. You see Rishi Sunak. What's your feeling on that?
I don't think there's any point revisiting that from a year ago. What I think
is... well behaved. This is very unlike you.
Well, no, what I see in Rishi Sunak is, it was a brutal way in which he eventually came to power, because he wasn't the immediate beneficiary, even though he went over the top. But what we have now is somebody who's teetotal, who's an expert as an economist, who worked for one of the biggest banks in the world, who understands global capital and finance better than virtually anyone else on the planet, just at the time when the biggest crisis faces the country is economic growth. So we have weirdly, as the British Constitution often does, conspire to have the right kind of person in charge. Now,
I like the fact the first thing you said was that he was teetotal.
Teetotal?
well, you know, I thought get my revenge in first on Partygate. It should be utterly irrelevant, of course, but it is something to reassure those who are still...
The Labour Party would be grateful that you mentioned it.
Still kind of obsessed with that. But in the end, there are serious decisions to be taken about the economy, big decisions, and we've got a man in charge who understands those things very, very well, better than most. Does he leave some people feeling underwhelmed? Yes, the party are used to somebody more charismatic, more dynamic, with fire in his belly, and we're all missing that a little bit. But that's no longer the contest. The contest is between one rather dull machine politician and somebody who's younger, more dynamic, and better qualified in the economy as a machine politician.
Can I just say, I was just going to say that if Rishi Sunak is a brilliant banker, then referring to Keir Starmer as a machine politician, I was going to say a brilliant lawyer who sent loads of people to prison and locked up loads of bad guys. The idea that Rishi Sunak is the best banker is the best... Well, there you go, I've just done his job for him, haven't I? Yeah. Well, there you go.
I am going to have to jump in here because, as you can see on your screens, the plane is coming down. Now, this, of course, is the plane carrying relatives of Sara Sharif, the 10-year-old girl who was found dead at her home in Woking. Her father, Irfan Sharif, her stepmother, and also her uncle on that plane that is travelling down to Gatwick Airport this evening. Sara Sharif, the 10-year-old, found dead at home in Woking, and it was after her father, Irfan Sharif, made a 999 call from Pakistan. We can talk now to Ivor Bennett, who's covering this story for us. Ivor, what's likely to happen when that plane does land?
Well, I think there'll be a flurry of activity on the runway. There already has been, in fact, a convoy of police vehicles with blue lights has been seen driving onto the tarmac, and we expect, so the moment these three members of Sara Sharif's family walk off that plane, we expect them to be met by police. They have been wanted for questioning connection with the 10-year-old's death for weeks, ever since her body was discovered at the family home in Woking on August the 10th. They have been the subject of an international manhunt after they went into hiding effectively in Pakistan, and a manhunt involving authorities here, there, and also Interpol. What prompted them to board this plane now, having boarded a plane early this morning from Pakistan, then changing in Dubai, that's not entirely clear, but we understand they made this trip of their own volition. But as I say, we expect them now to be met by police and questions that police have wanted to ask for the last 4 weeks. That's after they launched a murder investigation following the discovery of this 10-year-old girl's body at the family home just over a month ago. A post-mortem examination revealed that she had suffered multiple and extensive injuries. There have been comments made by the family to various outlets, including Sky News. Her stepmother said she would be willing to cooperate with the British authorities, and we understand they will now be speaking to them as soon as this plane touches down in the next few moments.
You can see that plane there going slowly down to earth, going down to Gatwick Airport. Police vehicles, we understand, have arrived at the airport just after 7 p.m. today. And, of course, on that plane that you can see there, that Emirates flight, 3 members of the 10-year-old's family, Sara Sharif, they're on the flight back to the UK from Pakistan as the plane there touches down on the runway. On that plane, her father, Irfan Sharif, his partner, Sara's stepmother, Bainash Batul, and also her uncle, Irfan's brother, Faisal Malik, all travelled to Pakistan, and they're now arriving back in the United Kingdom on that Emirates flight. Police at the airport. Now, we're going to be bringing you more on that story throughout the programme, of course. The plane arriving there in Gatwick Airport, Sara Sharif's family members arriving at Gatwick, and we'll, of course, bring you any updates on that story as we get them. Now, would you rather dirty rivers or fewer homes being built? It's a difficult choice, but the Lords have tonight voted down an amendment on government plans to scrap water pollution rules in order to encourage house building. Well, we can speak now to Tamara Cohen, who has the latest. What's been going on?
Hi, Sophie. Well, the government have lost. They had said that they wanted to change the rules on water pollution in order to build more homes. Rishi Sunak made great play of this. He said, we need to build more homes and we could build 100,000 more in the coming years if only the rules on the water were not so strict. Essentially, that developers need to prove they won't be putting any additional pollution into rivers and streams before councils will allow them to get things built. But Labour and environmental groups took a different view. Environmental groups like the Wildlife Trust said that if they went ahead with scrapping these rules, which date back to 2017, you would see waterways full of sewage. Now, supporters of the government's plans, like Mark Harper, who you just spoke to, say that the pollution that comes from housing is really small compared to, for example, the pollution that comes from water companies or from farming. So housing really doesn't make very much difference to it, and we have this really strong need to get houses built. Now, at Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak accused Labour of hypocrisy, of saying that they were the builders and not the blockers, but then acting in a different way. Now the government have lost the vote in the Lords by 156 votes for it to 203 against. And what that means is that they won't be able to get this scrapping of the rules through. They tried to attach it to another bill that was going through Parliament and called the Levelling Up Bill, and that's at its final stage. So it won't now go ahead. We haven't yet had a response from the government. I'm sure they'll say that they're disappointed, questions about why they didn't get enough of their people to vote. But I think the big question for the government now is whether, if they're so set on these plans, which of course perhaps damage their reputation for protecting the environment in favour of more house building, will they then introduce them again later this year when they have their King's Speech?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tamara. Certainly made things a bit more complicated for the government. We did, of course, hear Mark Harper defending the government plans earlier on the show, but certainly the Lord's vote shows there is strength of feeling on both sides when it comes to this difficult issue about house building on the one hand, but also, of course, the environmental concerns and dirty water too. Still to come on the Politics Hub. We're talking Inaction Man versus Captain Hindsight. PMQs Unwrapped is next. Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub, where each night we give you a front row seat on all of the day's political drama. And we can start with hearing Keir Starmer at PMQs.
The floor fell in for millions of families because of their economic mayhem. The classroom ceilings collapsed because he cut vital school budgets. And now the walls of our national security have been breached because they've ignored repeated warnings.
So, Ali, it was the second PMQs back after the summer recess. What was the mood like in there?
It was pretty fiery in there. They're just getting back into the swing of it. As you say, they've only just got back, but actually there's going to be recess soon because of conferences. So we're going to have a bit of a break from PMQs, but it was pretty heated and there were some nice little attack lines, new attack lines that Keir Starmer was trying out. Have a listen to this.
Probation, prison, schools, China. Yet again, inaction man fails to heed the warning and then blames everyone else for the consequences.
Rather than make the right long-term decisions for the country, he's taken the easy way out. It is typical of the principles-free, conviction-free type of leadership that he offers.
Inaction man. I just don't have any words to describe these insults anymore. And it wasn't the usual focus from Keir Starmer today, was it?
No, it was interesting. He was kind of talking about law and order, security, trying to take on the Tories there. Something really interesting that he didn't talk about, the pensions triple lock. Obviously, there's been a bit of backlash about that. Yesterday, the Work and Pensions Secretary effectively suggesting that that could be abandoned by the Conservatives. Obviously, lots of angry Tory MPs. We know that pensioners are a core part of the Conservative vote. Here's what happened at PMQs on that.
Will he commit his party, the Conservative Party, to maintaining the state pension triple lock beyond the next general election? Yes or no?
Our track record is clear. There is one party in this House that has always stood up for our pensioners, and that is the Conservative Party. This is the government that introduced and remains committed to the triple lock.
They're saying there that they're committed to it, but they're actually not confirming they're committed to it in their actual manifesto. But Labour on shaky ground too, and I wish we could have played Stephen Flynn's second answer if we'd had time, because he was then focusing on Keir Starmer, and we know that they haven't said that they're committed to keeping the pensions triple lock either. So I think both parties basically on shaky ground on that. But at PMQs Unwrapped, we don't just look at the headlines, we try and delve a bit deeper. So that's what we've been doing today. Absent from what I could see were the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, and the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Kearns, both in the spotlight this week over the alleged Chinese spy. There was plenty of fighting talk too, once again, from Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner.
Celebrated her first anniversary in
Their access to public services. It's clear.
And some heckling too from the Labour benches.
Will the Prime Minister look at what can be done in these circumstances to ensure that no one is left
The loudest cheer on the blue benches came after this.
Prison escapes under the Labour government were almost 10 times higher than under the Conservative.
But dig into the detail and the figures show the number of escapees fell dramatically under Labour. And a general election klaxon sounded by the Labour leader here.
How much more damage do the British public have to put up with before he finally finds the stomach to give them a say?
There may not be a general election in the near future, but there are going to be two big electoral tests for Rishi Sunak, one in Chris Pincher's seat and one in Nadine Dorries' seat, both on the 19th of October, two very different by-elections. Rishi Sunak is going to want to hold on to both of those.
That was nice. Me and Ali are getting to talk. It's quite nice to get to chat to Ali about what was going on at PMQs in her PMQs preview. Now, one of the things that came up was about the triple lock. And there's been so much ambiguity over what is going on with the pensions triple lock in the last few days. The government says they're committed to sticking to it, but there's a bit of a question mark about how long for. Now, I just want to bring in Amanda Acas on this, our political correspondent, because everyone says, look, no one can touch the triple lock because pensioners would go crazy and that's such an important voting bloc. You've been looking at some research that perhaps suggests something a little bit more nuanced?
Yes, so we're used to framing political debates in terms of the conflicting interests between older and younger voters, triple lock, housing policy, that kind of thing. But this is new research from the Nuffield Political Research Unit out today, which really challenges that assumption. So they're basically arguing that older people who have younger relatives who are struggling financially are actually more likely to support policies which are in their interests rather than their own. They say out of the 6,000 people they surveyed, nearly 1 in 4 of over 40s know someone in this boat, and that's nearly 8 million voters, and they're calling them the family fortunes voters.
So what's going on here then?
Yeah, so they basically put specific policies in terms of more government spending, which would benefit younger people as opposed to older people, and said even if this meant increasing your taxes or if it means perhaps reducing spending elsewhere. And it's quite interesting. So these are over 60s, and they found that in terms of local affordable housing, all the over 60, 61% agreed with that. But actually, when you look at this darker group here, this 72%, those are people who have those relatives who are struggling financially. So that's a much bigger proportion who agreed with that kind of spending. Free university education, again, 47% for that entire group. But again, far more of those people who have someone close to them who are doing badly. And again, interestingly, free vocational technical education, that was the most popular, 65% of all over 60s, but 74% of those who have relatives who are struggling thought the government should be spending more on that.
And how is that affecting their voting intention then?
Well, that's really interesting. So this was done in August last year. And if you look at the overall total, 42% of the over 40 age groups were going for Labour, so they were 14 points ahead compared to when you look at the older voters, as you would expect, the Tories some 20 points ahead of Labour. But then again, when you break it down into that group of people with the relatives doing badly, it really changes. So for Labour, they're even further ahead there. But for the Tories, what's quite interesting is that had switched slightly. So many more of the older voters were then saying that they would actually support Labour, which is quite extraordinary when you see the older voters are such a key bloc for the Tories normally. Now, it is worth saying that this survey's only been done once, so we don't know whether this is a new phenomenon or it's always been the case, and it was last year. Things have changed since then. But given the debates we're having, I think it's certainly food for thought for both parties.
Definitely is. Thanks very much, Amanda, for talking us through all those stats. Let's bring in Jess and Guto again, shall we, at this point. So, older voters vote back in Labour.
I mean, I found that absolutely fascinating, that piece of research. And actually, it squares with what I see. I mean, I represent a constituency where the sort of doing badly category of people is much more likely than, you know, sort of in leafy shires. And I definitely see it. I see older people really worried about their children and grandchildren. And I have noticed that particular pattern. I mean, obviously, where I live, older people vote Labour anyway. But, I hope they do. They mostly do. But I wouldn't be surprised, especially because that was a year ago, that there's natural alliances. We have a very volatile electorate at the moment, more volatile than anything. So it's not that much of a surprise.
I'm interested to know what you think is going on with the pensions triple lock.
I think the triple lock was a great idea in principle when it came in. It was a way of guaranteeing that older people could grow older gracefully and not worry that they'd be hard up. But that was in an age where inflation was always fairly constant. When you suddenly get to the point where inflation goes 8, 9, 10, 11%, then you say to the average old person, not the very poorest, but to the average person who may, at this point, own their own home, who may be reasonably comfortable, whose bills may have gone down, do you think that you deserve 11 or 12% when nurses are not being offered that, when your kids are being saddled with massive debts and paying 6, 8% interest on them? And people like, you know, my mum and all her friends sort of say, no, please don't. It's really embarrassing for us. And so hard though it is to let go of anything you promised at a manifesto, to be honest, and if we were honest in politics, things have changed. We had a global lockdown. It destroyed the economy. We spent billions and billions, rightly, paying people to stay home and be safe. But that means there's less money now, and we've just got to be honest about that. And so it's not the triple lock or not the triple lock. It's the triple lock or paying public sector workers, a triple lock or investing in the future. Let's just get the debate out there on the table, not just stick with a few things and pretend that these totemic things override everything else.
Really interesting to talk to both of you. Now, I do just want to take you back to Gatwick Airport, because we do have an update for you on what is happening on the plane. It does appear that police are now boarding that Emirates plane that has landed on the ground in Gatwick Airport. The plane, of course, carrying family members of Sara Sharif, the 10-year-old girl found dead at home in Woking. We'll have more after the break on what is happening on that plane in Gatwick.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before?
Yes.
Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Hello, welcome back, and we can take you straight to Gatwick Airport, and you're currently looking at the scene on the ground after a plane has landed from Pakistan, which is carrying 3 relatives of Sara Sharif, the 10-year-old girl found dead at home in Woking. And you can see there on your screens a police van waiting by. We've seen earlier on what appeared to be a number of police officers boarding that plane and then people being led away in handcuffs. So that is the current scene on the ground at Gatwick Airport. Sara Sharif, a 10-year-old girl who was found dead at home in Woking. And today, 3 of her relatives, her father, her stepmother and her uncle, travelling back from Pakistan to the UK. And as soon as that plane touched down in Gatwick, we saw what appeared to be police boarding that aeroplane and people being led away in handcuffs. We're expecting a police update in the next few minutes, and of course we'll bring that to you as soon as we get it. But you can see there a number of vans on the ground at Gatwick Airport surrounding that plane as soon as it touched down. You are watching The Politics Hub this evening. We're, of course, fully across the story that is developing at Gatwick Airport. But in the meantime, as we await for that police statement, I want to talk to you about AI, because the leading lights of the tech world, including Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, are meeting legislators in the US today to discuss some of the challenges of AI. There's been a lot of warnings, haven't there, about the threat to democracy. But could AI eventually replace politicians? Well, let's bring in Jess and Guto here. Now, we're very grateful for you, of course, to be on the show today, but we did just want to see what would happen. And I can do this because we've done a lot about whether AI could replace newsreaders, OK? So this is my payback time. We asked ChatGPT to give answers in the style of each of you, and this is what happened.
Did mine swear?
We're going to start... Well, let's find out.
What do you think about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership?
Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party was a complex and divisive period in the party's history. While he inspired many with his strong commitment to social justice, environmental issues and wealth redistribution, there were also challenges during his tenure.
What do you think about Tony Blair?
Tony Blair's government introduced important reforms and investment in areas like education and healthcare. I would acknowledge both his successes and shortcomings and emphasise the importance of learning from history as we move forward in shaping Labour's policies and direction.
What do you reckon? How do they do?
Right, I am nowhere near that balanced. It's like the BBC version of me. I'm definitely much more to the point. That made me feel really relieved. Also, that is, for me, as somebody with an actual Birmingham accent, listening to that is a bit like what it was like for me sometimes to watch Peaky Blinders. Is that it's sort of like slightly painful because that accent was much more like the Black Country than Birmingham. But it was better than any other mimicry of my accent that I've ever heard. So that is good for AI. Okay. But yeah, AI thinks I'm a lot politer than I am.
There you go. Yeah, you were quite polite, actually. Yes. You didn't, no swearing.
No swearing, no, just being like, I don't think that.
Well, let's find out. Guto, here we go.
Do you think Boris Johnson was a good Prime Minister?
Boris Johnson certainly had a unique and charismatic style of leadership that resonated with many people. He led the Conservative Party to a decisive victory in the 2019 general election. His leadership had both strengths and weaknesses, and opinions on his tenure are diverse across the political spectrum.
Why did you want to become a political advisor?
Working as a political advisor allows me to be at the heart of a decision-making process, providing counsel to leaders like Boris Johnson and helping them navigate complex issues.
What do you reckon?
Well, neither of us had any idea you'd done that. So
Sorry,
totally
we did spring it on you.
It's quite clever, isn't it? But again, it's I don't know. I was a BBC guy for years, so I'm used to sort of giving both sides, and that was slightly more or less nuanced, maybe. I did a course this summer, one of these short courses at the LSE in artificial intelligence and its ethical implications. And it's fascinating. And at its best, what it can do is accentuate everything good that we try and do. So you plug in the right things and it will set you off.
It's got amazing possibilities.
Amazing. But it can also accentuate the bad. So any biases in political decision-making, any things that tend to sort of, lead towards inequality, whatever, it can exacerbate those. So again, all it does is what we humans do. So what it does is put even more pressure on us to get the core decisions right. Because once we hand it over to them, they just execute.
I guess it's one of those things as well where it's here. So we've got to work out how to live with it, right?
And we're all already... People think it's like coming on the horizon. Like, I decide what I'm going to read next on my Kindle or what I'm going to watch next on Netflix on the basis of what I'm being told. I'm not making that decision anymore. It is literally going, you like this, and then I am watching it like I'm obeying the robot. I'm like, you're right, I do like that.
I want to ask you now about something that I was planning to talk to you before the breaking news, but we've got a bit of space to do it now, which is nice. You were in the room for a lot of PMQs prep, right? And I find this all completely fascinating. What was it like?
It is fascinating. So the first thing you need to guess is what is, the main leader of the opposition going to go on? And I'm quite chuffed that between me and two or three other key people preparing Boris, we got that right almost every week. Now, sometimes it's really obvious. Sometimes there's two or three things. We tended to get that. So you're ready with the answer. You're ready with the line. And ideally, you know that you get the last word. So there's a certain formula. You want to just defuse the first attack. Then you need the facts. And then you know that you get the last word after the leader of the opposition. So you want to end with something that just says, take that, punk. And And then the trickier ones are the ones where you've got somebody who's really independent-minded, who's not going to tip off the whips what they're going to ask you.
From your own side,
who's got a lot of respect on the backbenches, who's seen as somebody independent-minded in Parliament, people like Jess or me now, of course. But that kind of mind, that's when you sort of think they could go on all sorts of things, and they have the credibility and they have the House, and that's where the Prime Minister essentially is on his own.
Have you ever done any PIP? Because I have to.
No.
You are, one of the most funny, I guess, right? Politicians.
It's quite a low bar in Westminster, I'd say, but thanks.
Bar, but you are quite funny.
Yeah. I try and be funny.
I have to say, most of the jokes at PMQs are quite terrible.
There is, I have to say, sometimes I'm sat in Westminster and somebody will say something and everybody laughs, and I genuinely think I've missed it. I've missed what was funny. But yeah, I mean, the idea of doing it, I think that, to me, the idea of preparing for it, I would find it much better just to be totally off the cuff. I know that is completely unlikely, and you would never actually be allowed to do that.
The environment would all be like, what is happening?
Yeah, exactly. The idea of being funny off the cuff, I think, is quite hard. But I would definitely get myself in trouble, because I definitely, when you say funny things, sometimes they're taken out of context.
That is a gift, of course, and I worked for a man who had a natural ability to be funny, and 9 times out of 10 you're trying to say whatever thought crosses your mind that's hilarious, just maybe hold it. Don't say it. Don't necessarily deploy it. So now it's bigging people up, trying to get them to be more human, with Boris is reining him in a bit.
Thanks both very much for a very lively discussion this evening. Appreciate it. Now, remember, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all of the latest on the Hub throughout the day. And, of course, we're going to be bringing you all of the details on that Sara Sharif story on Sky News. The police expected to give a press update in the next few minutes, so do stay around to hear what they've got to say. Good night.